So, welcome to the 14th edition of the Astute Engineer. We have skipped episode 13, if anybody is tracking me. This is an interesting one. Andy Brayford, known you for many, many years in different forms.
Yes.
And your journey is an interesting one. So, I think there is a lot to be said about a field application engineer that's lost in today.
Mm-hmm.
I think that where you've got to, some of the work I've done alongside you, and I've been very fortunate, and I do take it as a privilege to have been in some of those meetings.
Thank you.
But let's go back to the start.
Yeah.
You left school thinking, I know what to do. I want to be an MI5 agent, or I'm going to be an audio engineer.
I didn't even know that, to be quite honest with you. When I was still at school, back in the days, we had a careers officer that came around and would talk to us about what we wanted to do when we left school. And I didn't have a clue, like probably a lot of kids that age. When you're 15 years old, I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. And what the careers officer did was kind of talk to you about stuff you enjoyed doing. And one of the things that I think obviously stood out to this, it was a lady at the time, I forget her name, but she was talking to me and I was saying about, I like to understand how things work. If that means taking things apart to figure out how things work, that's what I would do. Much to my mum's annoyance, with all the electrical appliances in the house started getting systematically taken apart and then put back together again and hoping that they worked.
How many of them did?
Some of them, not all of them. used to have all these little spare parts that were left over as well at the end of it. So it was that was kind of something that I think stuck with her, and she came back with an opportunity as an apprentice to go into a local company called United Norwest Co-op, part of the Co-op then, and actually, start to be an apprentice doing TV, video, and audio, and hi-fi repairs, things like that.
So I guess what we need to put a bit of context behind this is TVs back then are very different to the flat screens that we have now.
Very much so, yeah.
So, I mean, you were looking at technology that was built in the 70s and 80s, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
So that engineering mind that you've got is actually following patterns, trying to break things down to see where the challenge is.
Yes.
And then find a solution, which is actually kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, when you go back, when I did my qualifications for electronics, because that apprenticeship, they sent me 1 day a week to college and then on to university for a period of just over 4 years. What that taught you was a very logical process of how to solve the issues in front of you. And I believe that's something, as you say, that I very much use to this day. And I think it's set me up very well in life as well, to kind of just sometimes sit back and just look at things and take a very logical approach to how you handle things or solve problems or whatever it might be that's kind of in front of you.
Yeah, that's really important, because one of the questions that always comes to mind when I look at the engineer of today, and that's why I said the field application engineer, that role when I first started here was integral, and that was the connecting piece, excuse the pun, of the project team and an engineering challenge, and how that got back into the procurement and decision making, where to buy. But for you, that hands-on experience it's kind of lost now. I mean, I worry about the engineers of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've always said about this community we're trying to build is people like yourself who've got decades of experience. How do you impart that knowledge down? How do you share that?
I mean, you can only do it if people are willing to learn. That's the thing. I mean, I think younger generation these days, everything's all about AI, computing, and that kind of thing, and they're very much. I don't think what a lot of them realize is the roles that we've done in the past is we're the ones creating these new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones that are working with the OEMs and manufacturers and developing these latest products that these younger generations are now, very much using and very much getting very good at using. So I think the only way we can do it, I think, is if you can find the right people who are willing to learn and to learn off people like us. I loved learning from the people that I worked with over the years, and getting the knowledge out of them, asking them questions, querying why something did what it did,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure out. Again, boils back to wanting to understand how things work. I think it's just my inquisitive nature of what I'd done when I was growing up.
Yeah, if you go back through your career, you've worked for 3 or 4 very large established interconnect manufacturers,
Yeah,
but all got their own different nuances.
absolutely. Yeah,
And you've worked through distribution, and we've been, like I said, fortunate enough we worked together for some time. But when you're actually looking at that challenge, the engineering challenge,
yeah,
back in the early 2000s, you had quite a wide, diverse option of interconnect. Now that's become narrow because the bigger guys seem to have acquired a lot of those niche manufacturers. But you must have worked with some really cool technology even back then.
yeah.
So what changed the dynamics? What was a big shift? Well, there must have been a big step change in the interconnect and the engineering capability.
I think the big shift in the 90s, towards the late 90s, was the shift to surface mount.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, all the stuff that I was working on pretty much when I was doing my apprenticeship was all through hole technology.
Was
You
that in
know,
the 60s, did you say?
I might look that old, but I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it was all through hole technology,
Yeah.
and very much during the 90s, surface mount came
Mm-hmm.
about, and you probably know from your experience, there was people were very loath to kind of go to the surface mount technology. We've been using this through hole technology for such a long time, and I think that was a big shift because all of a sudden things could just be so much smaller.
Yeah.
PCB, not just the components, but the PCBs and the things that you were building could be so much smaller. And that was a big shift in the technology, and the companies like the connector manufacturers and stuff, they were the ones kind of leading that and saying, we can do these as surface mount components, but it's getting the engineering communities to go, we're going to use that and push the envelope with it.
Interesting. Never really considered that side of it. You're trying to convince someone to change from decades of doing it this way
Exactly.
to look what tomorrow could look like. And those early innovators.
Yeah.
But I guess with that change to service mount smaller, and changing the whole architecture design.
Yeah.
But actually, you're then putting more power, more signal through these connectors. You're asking more for something smaller.
Exactly.
So how do you overcome that in your design?
Well, I mean, that's where the connector manufacturers obviously had to come up with some very new and exciting technology and been able to run, the same amount of current, higher speed signals, because things are moving on all the time with regards to data and data transmission. So they're having to put connectors together that are, not only higher currents and higher power, but also be able to handle higher data speeds and everything else. And, you're working for the manufacturer, and sometimes they're driven by their customers. Sometimes the customers are asking the question saying, we need higher speed, or we need more power, or we need both, whatever it might be. And sometimes some connector manufacturers are just pushing the envelope themselves and coming up with a product and saying, this is what we've got. Who wants it? So, and working with the different manufacturers, it's interesting to see that some of them very much are customer driven, and some of them are just technology driven, just striving and doing their own stuff and pushing that out to the market.
Yeah, and I guess that's where it leads quite nicely to where you are now, because of that, the challenge in that interconnect world, you're going to get UEMI challenges.
Absolutely.
I mean, I love Quell. I mean, we've been working with Quell for many years, and sell to Quell.
Absolutely. That's
But
it.
yeah, just to dive down a little bit
Mhm.
into the Quell technology, because it is out there, it is pretty revolutionary.
Yeah.
To give a sort of untrained engineer an idea, I've only learned different terms from you, but
Yeah.
you're basically turning any connector into a filter connector.
Yeah. That's right.
But that technology is pretty advanced. So do you want to just touch on how you managed to get from where you first started in that, the bad signal on an old TV in the 90s,
Yeah.
you've now got a solution that can be retrofitted, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, as you said, I mean, I've worked for different companies in my career, and I think when you look back and actually like take stock of what I've done, I think it's set me up extremely well because not only have I worked getting my electronics qualifications, which gives me the technical aspect.
Hmm.
I worked for Celestica for a few years, so actually putting the boards together, working on manufacturing the
Feeling the pain.
PCBs. Yeah, so I've worked with that, and then you're working with the connector manufacturers themselves, and distribution like Astute when I worked for Astute, and at that point you've got quite a unique view of understanding
Mm.
not only what the manufacturer sees, what the distributor sees, and what the engineer also
Hmm.
requires, and kind of being able to come up with a solution, based around all of those viewpoints. So I've been quite lucky in that sense, and coming to being able to bring all that experience and knowledge from different parts of the processes, and building it
Hmm.
into one single role.
So where was the hardest transition? Right? Because you're trying to look at it from one lens,
Hmm.
trying to absorb it from another. Um,
Yeah,
there must have been, and you don't have to name where they are,
yeah.
but what was the biggest transition?
Probably when I went from working for a connector manufacturer to then working for distribution.
Right. Okay.
Because when you're working for a connector manufacturer, you're able to drill down in the knowledge because they've got a limited portfolio because they're one manufacturer. Then when you move to distribution, all of a sudden you might have 10,
Hmm.
20, 100 manufacturers. And now as an FAE supporting those manufacturers and working with the customers, you need to have a knowledge of all of those manufacturers
Yeah.
and the technical
Hmm.
aspects of that as well. So that was tough because really was a sharp learning curve of trying to get your head around all these different types of manufacturers, what they can offer, what they bring to the table, what's unique about some of them compared to others,
Hmm.
and then listening to customers, figuring out what they need and saying, well, we've got this from this manufacturer or this from this one. And it might be two totally different solutions, but they might be, workable for that customer. But yeah, that was a
Yeah, I can imagine
steep learning
actually.
curve.
And I guess you're at a stage now where you're not looking to represent many different
No.
options. You're solving a problem.
Yes.
And so EMI,
Yeah,
um, everyone has EMI challenges.
that's right. Yeah,
Are they always at the back end of that design and manufacturing and test?
they are.
They
Yes.
are.
Yeah.
So does that change as well then your engineering because you're looking at solving a problem when all the building blocks are already in place?
Yeah. It does because, as you know, the Quell product goes inside the connector. So when you're mating the connector, it fits inside there. Because really, at the point when they're testing for EMC, the design's finished. So they've designed their unit, they've done all their functional testing and everything else, and the EMC is normally pretty much the last testing they do before they go off to production. So if they've got a problem with EMC, yes, they can go back and redesign the board, and do all that and add the components, change components on their PCB, but that can take months
And cost, I guess.
and cost, yeah, all your engineering time. And then if you change that board, you've got to go back through all that testing process
Hmm.
again to get to the EMC testing, at which point they could fail again. So, it's having a solution that fits inside that connector. So even while they're in the test chamber still, they can just unplug the connector, push the E seal inside, make the connector again, and retest straight away and know straight away whether they'll pass or fail.
Yeah, and I mean I know the product quite well because working alongside you, and I think what's
Taught you well.
amazing whenever I get to speak to customers about the Quell seal, I normally use the light test,
That's
and
it. Yeah.
yeah, I know some people just listen to this podcast, but actually having silicon floating in, you've got a capacitor
Yeah.
or resistor, varistors, whatever you need
Yeah.
to isolate individual pins inside some silicon is, I mean, where on earth did that come up from? I mean,
I think the two guys that started Quell 30 years ago now, believe it or not, Kevin and Paul,
is it 30 years? Wow.
um, they were EMC engineers at the time, and they were, I think, getting frustrated, with when something was failing EMC, about having to go back and start redesigning things, changing
Hmm.
PCBs, cables, whatever it might be. And so they thought, why can't we put these components inside the connector? And that's kind of where it came from. I think they started with a very old, simple pizza oven in the garage, trying to come up with a design of how to make this work. And they came up with the idea, obviously, of embedding components within the silicon, which is thin enough to fit inside the connector so it doesn't interfere with the mating of the two connectors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the E-Seal was born.
It's
Yeah.
it's a good story. I mean, quite often when I talk about people who inspire you, I mean, the guys were inspirational to come up with that
Yes,
solution. But I
absolutely.
think you're also quite fortunate that you've got a leader in the True Leadership Foundation in Scott,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
the passion for that technology
Yeah.
is as soon as he
Unbelievable.
engages with people, he just he gets people to buy into it, and and we certainly do. I think you still got your pizza oven there, isn't he? I
He
mean,
has, yeah.
but if you go back, to where you're looking from an engineering point of view, and I think this is quite a nice segue into what you do and what I've found really useful, and
Mhm.
you've taught me a lot with how to solve that problem. You're not going to solve it first time, and the seals won't solve it first time. But what you do is you work with that application, and
Yeah,
and I love that side of it. This isn't a off the shelf, one size fits all. You can modify and tailor it.
absolutely. Yeah.
If an engineer is sitting there today with an EMI challenge, and they're looking for that eureka moment,
Mhm.
that's what my problem is. I guess that's like a 1 in 1,000 chance. You've got to keep testing it. Um, so how do you bring your solution? Do you already look? You're looking at the attenuation curve. You're looking at what they're actually trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
What do you need to help them solve the problem?
So we just need, obviously, we need to know the connector part number because we need to know what it is that we're fitting our part into. And then we just need to understand what their EMC issue is.
Right.
If they've already done the testing, you normally get a graph which shows at what frequency and what levels you're failing at. If they can share that with us, that's pretty much all we need. That tells us exactly the frequencies we need to aim at attenuating. We've got the connector part number, and then we just need to understand if they've got any other signals or anything like that on that same connector. Because what we don't want to do is filter out the video signals or
Yeah.
Ethernet signals or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it might be. So they give us a pin out, just let us know what other signals they've got on the different pins, and we'll design the part for them. And the best part is we can design, build, and ship them a sample in 1 to 2 days. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of what we do, you know.
And normally this is a conversation. This isn't meant to be about a sales pitch for Quell, although we clearly are, and we can blame Scott for that. But but it is actually solving a big engineering challenge, isn't it?
It is, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of, you talked about where we are in that cycle, design cycle for a customer. What I think we do, which is good for distribution as well, is you guys get involved very much at the start of the design process. You're talking to the customer about the silicon, about the components on the PCBs, all that kind of stuff, even maybe their boxes and everything else,
Mm-hmm.
even maybe building the PCBs and stuff for them now with the stuff you guys have got. But once that board is designed and they go off to testing, your part of, as an FAE or as a distributor, your part in that process stops,
Yeah.
right? Until they've pretty much got to the point where they're going into production and they
Mm-hmm.
want to come and place their orders with you. But during that testing process, that's where we come in. So we can actually keep you engaged during all those phases of the process. We keeps you engaged with the customer.
Yeah.
So I think it's important as well because it's only during that testing process is where our solution comes in. And as you rightly say, we are solving a problem. And the customers and the engineers, they love that. It's not just about here's a connector that potentially will work,
Mm-hmm.
or here's another one from a different manufacturer. They come to us with an issue and we can actually solve that problem for them.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen it in evidence,
Yeah.
so I know how it works, and it is a great tech. But back to the connector side of your life,
Mhm.
and there's been a lot of changes. You mentioned the switch to service mount, which obviously changed so much. But what about some of the other challenges, the likes of like cadmium and raw material that you've got different conflicts that are coming in?
Yeah.
How do you look at that from an engineering point when you've got end of life or you're having to shift and pivot pretty quickly? How do you go about finding that information, or do you just scroll?
I mean, you are reliant on the engineers kind of being ahead of the curve on that sort of stuff, and wanting to look to change before the regulations kick in, and all of a sudden they can't buy, as you said, the cadmium plated connectors anymore, or hexavalent chromium, with Roche compliance and
Yeah.
things like that they couldn't all of a sudden use. You are hoping that the engineers within these companies are kind of aware of this, and before all that comes
Yeah.
in and we can't buy these
Yeah. Too
anymore,
late.
they do come to you and say, what have we got that's different?
Hmm.
And then the manufacturers that, as long as you're working with the right manufacturers as distribution, they've got those products already in development. So, that very much was the case because it was big news about cadmium. In particular with the military marketplace. Everybody used cadmium connectors back in the day. All of a sudden it was, you can't use these anymore, and everybody started a panic.
Yeah.
And that's where the blank zinc nickel came in, and everybody was starting to look at that, and it was an equivalent plating. But thankfully the connector manufacturers were kind of ahead of the curve on that, and they were producing parts before, the actual customers all of a sudden couldn't use them anymore. So
Yeah, and I think there will be another hurdle to overcome,
I'm
whatever
sure.
it will be in the next few years. But I think the difference now, though, and we've talked about it in loads of different conversations about the access to data and samples, the way that an engineer used to like touch and feel.
Yeah.
Since COVID, that's changed.
Absolutely.
And the younger engineer wants that instantaneous feedback.
Yeah.
But they want it online. They want it in 30 seconds. So how do you approach that as an engineering standpoint if you're not getting that face-to-face access?
I mean, it's very difficult. I think you still got the older generation of engineers that have probably still got the catalog sitting on their desk. They're the guys that will engage with you as an FAE and with as a distributor and want to talk to you about options. I think, as you say, a lot of people have moved on to maybe designing things from an online perspective. Your Mausers, your DigiKeys, your big suppliers online that can get you stuff tomorrow, the day after, and you pay a premium for that, of course. But engineers like to hide behind the screen of their laptops, computers, etc., and just go and I can buy that from there. I don't need to talk to anybody. I don't need to pick up the phone, and they love that. So it is difficult because trying to get engaged with those people when all they want to do is just go online, click on it, get it here tomorrow, it's done. It's difficult, particularly with Quell, to get their mind share and try and get them engaged in conversations. Luckily for us, when they've got a problem with EMC, it's not a case of going online and finding a solution. There isn't one.
Yep.
They have to kind of engage. So thankfully, we do still have that very much with our products. But with all the stuff on the connectors and things like that, there's so many manufacturers and online retailers now where they can just get them
and
instantly.
And I also think with COVID, the shopping behaviors that we all adopted with however many packages you could get delivered from Amazon a day. But that mentality is still carried on, I think, in quite a few. But when you look at, from your side of things, we've been around the industry for a long time, but you see some young engineers coming through. What advice do you give them? Where do they get their knowledge from, or where do they find their solutions? Because are there chat forums that are useful for them? Where do you go?
There are a lot of online forums and things like that of communities, and I think that's taken over from maybe the coffee pot conversations that you would have when you're working for a company. For me, I always love talking to the people that have been at the companies for a long time, getting their knowledge and understanding how they did things, how they worked, and just getting that knowledge out of them and talking to them that way. And I think we need to encourage the younger generations a bit more into that by maybe limiting what they can do as an online solution and maybe forcing them down that route. Because I think having those conversations, along with it being extremely important, I think then also plays into their career of picking up the phone and talking to people. Because I think that's very much an art. As an engineer, that's very much an art that I think is lost on a lot of people these days.
I do agree with you. I think the one thing we need to take into consideration, though, that the younger mind works so much quicker than ours.
Yeah.
They absorb information differently. They want, they've got a thirst for knowledge, but you're right. Sometimes it's hidden. And I guess in time, when you start to get involved in more and more projects, you have to sort of cross-pollinate, and you then find those social skills. But I do think that's a challenge that we've got to address.
Yeah.
And the communities is definitely one way of doing that. But if you go back then, so put yourself into a younger Andy Brayford. Let's skip the audio.
Yeah.
You're sitting there in manufacturing, and you've got to choose your path. What would you do differently?
I'm not sure I would do anything differently. And the reason I say that is, I mean, I met my wife doing what I did. I met my wife through work as well. So
Right.
my now wife, who we've been married for 16 years. So I met her working in doing the path that I did. So obviously I wouldn't want to change that.
You've got to say that.
I've
by the way.
got to say
Right.
that. She told me I've got to say that. So, from my perspective, as I sort of alluded to at the start, having that different knowledge from different sides of manufacturing, being a manufacturer, distribution, etc., I think bodes really well
Mhm.
for the role which I was doing, which I am doing with Quell. I think it's just I don't think I would change anything. I think it's set me up
Yeah, it's a
quite
tough
well in
question
life.
because
It is
it's helped
tough.
shape you. I
Yeah.
guess I think for me, if I was to ask you to give advice to somebody there, you would then, so from what I've interpreted there, you would say, go and find many different facets of the engineering world. Don't
Yeah.
just stick to one pathway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
A good thing, I think they're coming back into it a bit more. I was an apprentice.
yeah.
I got the apprenticeship, and I think that set me up to do what I do extremely well. And I know they're becoming more popular again these days, but to do that apprentice role, because I think one thing they do normally when you're an apprentice is they do move you around different parts of a company,
Yeah.
different departments
Mhm.
to see how different
Mhm.
things work. Because you might think you want to be an engineer or working as a purchaser or things like that. But actually, when you get to another department, you actually think, actually, I quite enjoy
Yeah.
doing this.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important thing as well.
Yeah.
As I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was a career officer that actually got me this apprenticeship. And I thought it was great.
No,
You
I
know,
think you're right. I'm
yeah,
big advocate for engineering
yeah,
and apprenticeships, especially because it gets people to communicate as well.
absolutely.
And I don't think anyone understands what their pathway will be when they're that young, just leaving school or university. But yeah, you have managed to cross a lot of different
Yeah.
pathways in the interconnect world, and that's what's made you the person you are.
Yeah.
Where do you see? We talked about the shift with service mount. Everyone's talking about AI and what that's going to do to our industry, but where do you see the next technology shift? Is there something out there that you think, wow?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think AI is going to be the big thing for the next quite a few years, I think. I think AI is there, but I think people need to understand how they can use it and utilize that as an asset for for the companies and for the manufacturing and things that they're doing. We're starting to look at AI as an assistance within Quell, and I think a lot of companies are probably doing the
Yeah.
same thing. I know you guys are. I think that's going to take people a lot of time. I think over the next few years to kind of utilize AI, figure out what it does, and as AI develops, become more and more embedded within day-to-day processes and day-to-day activities within companies. Not necessarily to replace people. I don't think that's
No.
necessarily the case. I think it's to help and support and to help people to do their tasks. We've
Hmm.
already been talking about interactions with people.
Hmm.
How do you get this knowledge into
Hmm.
maybe the younger engineers that are coming through? I'm saying talk to the older engineers, not ask AI what the answer is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I think should be, that should be very much a part of the process is leave your laptop or your computer there. This is how you do it. Talk to people, understand the processes and the old school way, if you like.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's a
Yeah,
great point that you will get more from having a cup of coffee with a senior engineer than what
absolutely.
you will from
Yes.
AI. Now,
Yeah.
nothing against AI, and there comes a time when the AI knowledge and the content it brings is invaluable now, but it's
Yeah.
going to go off to scales in the next few years. But
For sure.
you
Yeah.
still to talk through one of the challenges.
Mm.
And we've been involved in a few pretty tough challenges with some military customers
Mm.
where they'd been working on a problem for a long time. You amazing, come up with a solution, it solved a problem, they can move forward. But without all of those conversations and the failing to find a solution over and over again, all of that learning can't be transitioned into an AI portal
Mm.
because we're not putting that information in there. We're
Yeah.
putting a solution. So
Yeah.
you've got all those layers beforehand that stuck up in someone's grey matter
Yeah.
rather than on paper. And I think talking things through, inspire those neurons that sometimes we all fall asleep.
Yeah, and listening is another very. I've always been a big advocate of when you're sat with a customer, you need to listen.
Hmm.
It's not just a case of talking to them. This is what we do. This is the products we have. This is what we can do for you. Blah blah blah. You need to stop and
Yeah.
let them talk. 'Cause you need to understand what their problems are. What are they trying to achieve? What is it they're struggling with, and then you can come in with your solutions and understanding bringing that knowledge of what you've got to be of benefit to them. That's a big thing about being maybe the FA, the applications engineer and things, those types of roles is listening, understanding, and then being part of that process.
Yeah, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think where you have shaped, your pathways helped you because that commercial acumen you've got,
Mm.
you are able to pause, think, listen, what's your challenge, then try to find a solution. Other people don't actually remember they've got two ears and one mouth and all the others. But yeah, so I think you're slightly unique there. But um, I know you're not a big reader, so I'm not going to ask you about the books. But what inspired you? Who was your inspiration as you was moving through the ranks? Someone must have stood out.
There's probably a couple of people, two or three people during my career that have stood out. First one, when I first got into being an applications engineer, there was a guy called Gary Nelson who's at Phoenix Contact now. I think
No.
you may know him. Um, Gary took me under his wing and he taught me everything about connectors. At the time, I was an electronics engineer and I could tell you all about TVs and videos and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But when it come to actual connectors and having those discussions with a customer about their requirements, like we were saying, and understanding what you can offer them, Gary was very much a big part of getting me to understand all the terminologies about connectors, how they work, the different manufacturers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was a really good guy that really got me interested and sold on being an applications engineer as well and using that knowledge. So yeah, he's one. And then I've been lucky as I've gone through my career. Gary Nelson, Gary Evans, sorry, from who we both know.
Yep.
He also was for me then was quite inspirational in working with manufacturers when we were at distribution. And looking not just about the technical aspects and working with the engineering, but also working with the manufacturers as a distributor,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe looking at that next level of the relationship and how you manage that, understanding what it is that the manufacturers are looking for, and what the distributor that you're working for is looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and making that work as well, and then transitioning that into working with engineering and customers and everything else. And more recently, you've already mentioned it, Scott, having worked with Scott Lindbergh at Quell, he is just a force of nature,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
who everybody absolutely, loves, and being very fortunate now to work with him, and to get that knowledge of how he builds relationships, how he works with, you know, certainly in the US with the rep groups as well as distribution, and obviously distribution in Europe and wider afield over here. how he's built that relationship, how he's grown Quell and what we do and turn that into a really, really great business and a great product. And just the chance to learn and work with him as well is a real honor.
Yeah, I mean, we both talk highly of Scott. I think one of the nice things is you've got a unique product that sells itself.
Yeah.
But what Scott does, he's not trying to commercialize it that it's a big sell. It's actually still a big solution. And he's looking at it from that engineering, I got something that can help you. And I think that's kind of still pretty unique in today's world.
It is, yeah.
But look, let's hope we carry on working together.
Oh, I'm sure,
for years to come. I do want to finish with Sell the Quell, because that'll make Scott happy.
It certainly will.
I think with the interconnect world, people forget how complex it's become, and it continues to, because we want things faster, more powerful, lasting longer, which means you've got more challenges through that interconnect and the contacts and everything else that goes around it. But thanks for coming along.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
As always, we're going to continue to try to get a diverse community, and the community is a key part of what we're trying to do with the Astute Engineer. Any suggestions? You know what social channels to follow us on, so reach out, let us know. We won't be doing episode 13, but we will go on to episode 15 soon.